first assassination attempt. He actually had an attempt on his life when he was the president-elect. And not a lot of people know about that. So our subtopic for today is an assassination attempt failed. So he's just the president-elect when this occurs. And this assassination attempt occurs on Sunday morning, December 11th, 1960. Sunday morning, December 11th, 1960. Sunday morning, December 11th, 1960. Now, President-elect Kennedy was actually at the family's oceanfront Palm Beach home in Florida. They have homes in lots of places, and they used to go down to Palm Beach quite a bit to one of their retreats. So on Sunday morning, December 11th, 1960, President-elect Kennedy was at the family's oceanfront Palm Beach home in Florida. And what was he doing there? He was doing two things. He was working on his tan, and he was working on his inaugural address that he would soon be giving on Inauguration Day. So he took some time off to go down to Palm Beach, kind of relax, work on his tan, and work on his inaugural speech. Well, what do you think he was doing the morning of December 11th, since it was a Sunday and he's Catholic? Getting ready to go to Mass. And there was a St. Edward Catholic Church in Palm Beach, and he was getting ready to go to Mass. So the morning of December 11th, Kennedy was getting ready to attend Mass at St. Edward Catholic Church in Palm Beach. And since he's the president-elect, what does he have to protect him? Secret Service protection. So what he was doing on December 11th, he was heading to the front door of the home where the Secret Service were waiting for him to drive the short distance to the church. Okay? So he leaves his home that morning, heading to Mass. Secret Service is there waiting, and they're going to drive him the short distance to the church. Now, parked down the street from the Kennedy home, just down the street, was a 1950 Buick with Richard Pavlik sitting behind the steering wheel. So parked down the street, a little ways down the street from the Kennedy home in Palm Beach, Florida, was a 1950 Buick with Richard Pavlik sitting behind the steering wheel. And Pavlik was just sitting there watching the president-elect. He was a 73-year-old retired postal worker, 73-year-old retired postal worker who was holding a switch wired to 7 sticks of dynamite. So parked down the street from the Kennedy home was a 1950 Buick with Richard Pavlik sitting behind the steering wheel. Pavlik was a 73-year-old retired postal worker who was holding a switch that was wired to 7 sticks of dynamite. And basically, Pavlik had been stalking Kennedy all across the country in previous months. Stalking him all across the country. And he was mad at Kennedy for 2 reasons. One is he had an unbelievable hatred for the Catholic Church. An unbelievable hatred for the Catholic Church. He was mad at the Catholic Church, and Kennedy was a Catholic, and so he was going to make a point. Another thing he was angered by is he believed in his heart that Joseph Kennedy Sr. had actually stolen the election for his son. He did some underhanded things to get his son elected, which might actually have been true, according to things we may talk about later. So he was convinced that the elder Kennedy, Joseph Kennedy Sr., had stolen the presidency for his son. On top of that, he had a devoted hatred of the Catholic Church. And he'd actually been stalking Kennedy all across the country in earlier months. And what was he going to do, do you think? What was his plan? When Kennedy got in that automobile to go to church, what was he going to do? Well, he's down the street. He was actually going to ram his car into the back of Kennedy's automobile and then detonate the explosives. So he was just waiting for him to get in his car, that he was going to hightail it down the street, run his car right into Kennedy's automobile, and detonate, push the switch and detonate the 7 sticks of dynamite. Yeah, it was. That was the plan. Now, Secret Service had no idea. The Secret Service was a lot different in those days. They had no idea that he was even in the area, and Pavlik had a clear, unimpeded path to Kennedy's car. There was nothing in his way. He was just waiting for the president-elect to get in that car. He didn't do it. Why did he?
It was Sunday.
No.
Church.
What? What'd you say?
No, but all believing God.
Just as Kennedy was about to leave, Jacqueline came to the door of the automobile with 3-year-old Caroline to see her husband off. She wasn't going with him, but she went to the automobile with 3-year-old Caroline to give him a kiss and say goodbye. So just as Kennedy was about to depart, Jacqueline came to the door of the automobile with the 3-year-old daughter Caroline to see her husband off. So people, historians believe that it turned out that Pavlik was very willing to kill himself, as Hannah said, and John F. Kennedy, but was not willing to add Mrs. Kennedy or the president's daughter to the mix. So he decided to wait for another opportunity. So it turned out that Pavlik was very willing to kill himself and John F. Kennedy, but was not willing to add Mrs. Kennedy or the daughter to the mix. Hold just a second. So he decides to wait for another opportunity. Well, the opportunity did not occur. Pavlik was arrested 4 days later when word leaked out about his plan. Somehow they found out. I don't know exactly how, Hannah, but somehow the Secret Service became privy to this crazy guy and what he had been doing. And he was arrested 4 days later before he could plan another opportunity to assassinate the president-elect. And according to the Secret Service, after they arrested Pavlik, he had enough dynamite in his car the morning we were talking about to level a mountain. 7 sticks of dynamite would have blown up he might even have got Mrs. Kennedy and Caroline in the house. So he was thinking that he was just going to run into the president's car, detonate, kill himself and the president of the Secret Service. But the fact was, Secret Service said he had so much dynamite in that car, he would have probably leveled the whole complex. Okay? So Kennedy survives an assassination attempt before he's ever president. Okay? All right. Very good. That'll take us to our next subtopic, which is the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. Actually, that is our last subtopic of this test material, the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. This is a little bit of an unusual inauguration because of the weather. The inauguration of John F. Kennedy. Now, Milo's going to, as an opportunity, he's going to watch the inauguration of President-elect Trump, and I'll bet you there won't be 6 inches of snow on the ground when you go to Washington, D.C. for that inauguration. It's just my guess. But on January 20th, 1961, over 6 inches of snow covered the entire city of Washington, D.C. On January 20th, 1961. Over 6 inches of snow covered Washington, D.C. Do you know anything about people in cities like that? When they get 6 inches, if we get 6 inches of snow, we don't think that's light, brisk, you know.
Yeah,
You get 6 inches in D.C., shut the city down. I mean, because people don't have snow, they don't have a clue. Okay? This was the biggest snowstorm in decades. And it actually hit the nation's capital the night before. Now look at this lovely, the Evening Star, Washington, D.C., Thursday, January 19th, 1961. Threat of 2-inch snowfall hangs over inauguration. They actually got 6. But that's such a big deal. 2 inches was such a big deal they were getting. They put it on the front page of the paper. 2 inches. So it was a big deal. They had, you know, all these inaugurations had been pretty easy to go. But there was 6 inches of snow. Now, despite the cold, approximately 20,000 people in coats and scarves gathered at the east portico of the Capitol. East portico. Anybody know what a portico is? You'll get a chance to see it when we're in D.C. East portico, I'll spell that. What's up? Yeah, it is. What's the fancy name for it? Porch. But if you look at the back of the Capitol, there's a big portico where they inaugurate the president. So on Despite the cold, on January 20th, 1961, about 20,000 people in coats and scarves gathered at the east portico of the Capitol to witness in the swearing in of our nation's 35th president. Milo goes and watches the swearing in this year. It'll happen on the east portico of the Capitol. Okay? Now, the highlight of the inauguration was a poem that was read by Kennedy's favorite poet, Robert Frost. That was going to be the big highlight of the inauguration, was a poem that was read by Kennedy's favorite poet, Robert Frost. Anybody ever heard of Robert Frost? Pretty famous poet. Aged at that time. Fairly old guy. We'll talk about that. Well, what happened is when Kennedy was elected president in November of 1960, he actually approached Robert Frost and asked if he would read a new poem at his inauguration. Okay, he didn't want him to recite one that he had already written. He asked Frost if he would write a new one for him, which is a pretty big deal. So Frost agreed, and he finished that new poem the night before inauguration. Finished it the night before. Reminds me of some of you. Anyway, after being elected president in November of 1960, Kennedy asked Frost if he would read a new poem at the inauguration. Frost agreed and finished the poem on the eve of Inauguration Day. Now, are you saying that he read the poem I gave you instead, one that he had already written? Well, let's look and see. Anybody heard of this one here? The Gift Outright?
Yeah, we had to read that again.
Okay. What'd you read it in? Very good. Well, let's see how this ties in. Well, what happened is Frost got up to read his poem, and because of his deteriorating eyesight and the fact that the sun was glaring off the new fallen snow, which made it very bright, he could not see the words of the new poem he had written and didn't have it memorized to read it. So he stepped up with his new poem, set it on the podium. Because of his eyesight that was deteriorating, and the fact that you've ever gone outside when it's, real sunny and snowy, it's so bright. So he kind of panicked a little bit, and he simply recited a poem he had written from his memory entitled The Gift Outright. So he did not read the new poem at President Kennedy's inauguration. He got up there, panicked a little bit, and recited The Gift Outright from memory. Now, who knew that he did that? Two people knew. Kennedy and Robert Frost. And it was okay. It was okay with the president. And he was very, very fond of Robert Frost and was so appreciative that he came. And Robert Frost actually died in 1963 before President Kennedy was assassinated. And President Kennedy was one of the many mourners at Frost's funeral. So it's a really kind of a neat situation. It didn't work out, but it worked out just fine. So you have a copy of the poem here. Now, Kennedy steps up and gives his inaugural address. And he devotes his remarks to the following 4 topics. Okay? He devotes his remarks in his inaugural address to the following 4 topics. This is what he talks about in his inaugural address. He talks, number 1, about the role of the United States in a divided world. He talks about the role of the United States in a divided world. What does he mean, Nick, by a divided world, do you think? Very good. Communism versus non-communism. Okay? Second thing that he devotes his remarks to is he warned the communist world that the United States would remain strong. Okay? He warned the communist world that the United States would remain strong. We would not succumb to communism. We would remain strong. So he gave a warning to the communist world that the United States would remain strong. Third thing he did is he urged both the communist and the non-communist sides to renew a search for world peace. He emphasized in his inaugural address, and he urged both the communist and the non-communist sides to renew a search for world peace. So he hits the role of the United States in a divided world. He hits a warning to the communist world that we will remain strong. But yet he urges both the communist and non-communist sides to try to renew a search for world peace. And then he challenges, number 4, he challenges both the communist and non-communist sides to join forces in a united fight. He challenges both the communist and non-communist sides to join forces in a united fight. And you know what he wanted us to unite to fight against? He challenged both the communist and non-communist sides to join forces in a united fight against the common enemies of the world. Okay? He challenges both communist and non-communist sides to join forces in a united fight against what? The common enemies of the world, which were tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. So he challenged both communist and non-communist sides to join forces in a united fight, and that fight would be against the common enemies of the world, which he quoted as being tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Very, very popular inaugural speech. And here are some more familiar quotes you don't have to write down, but I'm sure you've heard. He said, "Let the word go forth to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans." What's he talking about? Let the word go forth to friend and foe alike, to the people in the United States and those outside, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. What's he alluding to? A lot of ways. What? What?
Olympics. Wait, what?
No? Who are the new generation? New generation nothing for a younger generation of Americans. And you're going to see more active participation by younger Americans, is what he's saying, because he's the youngest man ever elected president, and he's being followed by many, many people of 43 years of age and less. Okay? Then this is the one you probably heard the most, and probably the most famous quote. "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man." So he addresses our own country. He said, "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." But he also addressed the world by saying, "My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man." Incredibly moving inaugural address. Well, I want to tell you a little story, and I got to prelude this a little. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. was a tough dude. He expected his kids to be first in everything they attempted. Everything they attempted. The world was a rough place for losers. And he had a family creed. Kennedys don't cry. All the tragedies the Kennedy families had, very seldom did you ever see one shedding a tear. And he made it clear to his children that he was in control of the family. So during the inaugural parade, something very historic happened. Now I want to explain the inaugural parade. They inaugurate the president at the East Portico, and then they parade the president and his family, an inaugural parade from the Capitol to the White House. And there's people in stands on the side. Milo may get a chance to see this. The streets are lined, and they were particularly lined for this new president. Well, as the new president's limousine passed by the Kennedy family that was sitting in the bleachers along Pennsylvania Avenue, Joseph P. Kennedy stood as his son went by as President of the United States and tipped his hat to his son. His son, who never wore hats, stood up in the limousine as it was moving and tipped his hat back to his father. What does that mean historically? I'll repeat it one more time. As Kennedy's limousine that's taking him from the Capitol to the White House goes by the stands on Pennsylvania Avenue, which the entire Kennedy family was sitting in, As John Kennedy looks up to his father and waves, his father stands and tips his hat to his son. The president stands in the limousine and tips his hat back to his father. What's the significance of the story? Nobody could really believe it happened. What was the significance? What'd you say? I think you're close. That's exactly. He, for the first time in history, acknowledged that his son was higher ranking than him. That was a big thing for the president's father to do. Okay, it was the first time ever that the elder Kennedy had ever acknowledged that a member of his family was now at a higher rank than himself. And I'm going to show it to you. Okay, on video. It's awesome. So we're going to watch a short video to end the day on Kennedy's inauguration.